So today we will have Francisco Simões with us. He will talk about the increasing relevance of European rural young people in policy agendas, contributions from community psychology. And with him, we will have also Elena Marta, Cynthia Albanese, and Nicholas Carr, and myself to give a little bit of contribution to the discussion. And we have with us many people that are actually very much engaged on the topic. So I expect that we will have a very rich discussion. So thank you, Francisco, for accepting this invitation and for presenting your work with us. So just to give a little bit, everyone knows Francisco Simões, at least I guess so, in this today. So Francisco Simões is an associate researcher and full member of the Center for Social Research and Intervention at ISCTE in Portugal. He's co-coordinator of the thematic line promoting inclusion, equality, and citizenship of the Social Digital Lab for Public Policy, and he's also co-coordinator of the research group Community Education and Development from ISCTE. He's the chair of the Cost Action Rural Need Youth Network, that is a cost action funded by we have also Claudia, funded by the European Commission, and he's also the principal investigator of the project Track in Public Employment Services in Europe, in supporting rural needs. And I could keep going, just presenting a list of the things that you have been doing, but I think that what is more relevant today is to say that you have been working with young people, rural needs for a while, and you will be today presenting some of the result of the work that you have been doing in the last few years. So thank you again, and you may start if you want.
Thank you, Maria. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here with, I think, a joint meeting between the ECPA and our Cost Action Rural Need Youth Network. Please, at least I can see that it's more or less even the representation here in the meeting. So thank you for the opportunity to actually be presenting here a paper on behalf of the team, including yourself, Elena, Cynthia, and Nicholas. I would like to start our conversation today with an exercise, let's say, a very short exercise. And the idea is the following. I will show you a video. It's a very short video. And in the video, you will see two basketball teams, one in white, one in black, and you have a task. Your task is to count the number of passes that the white team makes during the video. It's a 20 video segment, okay? A 20 second segment. So I will share my screen so that you can see the video, and you just have to count. When you finish counting, just ask to the chat how many passes the team in white made. Okay, so I will start running the video.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? Go!
Okay, so we're such a small number of people, so probably you just can open your mic and say, how many did you count? That's more than okay, probably.
12.
12.
8.
So we have 12.
14.
13, I hear 13. 14.
13.
13. Any number, have anyone counted differently from 12, 13, or 14?
I counted 8.
8. Vladislava counted 8. Okay, so our confidence interval goes from 8 to 14, I think. So it's a wide range. So here's the right answer.
The answer is 13.
Okay, so the answer is 13, but that's not the most important thing in the video.
But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Did anyone see the moonwalking bear? No. So let's see. Let's restart the video and see what happened. Okay, so this is part of a campaign in London for preventing accidents with cyclists, because of course many of the time, or most of the times, we miss something, and our focus of attention is really limited. So as you see, even when a moonwalking bear comes along and dances between two teams, if we're focusing on counting the number of passes, we will focus only on the instruction, but we won't be looking at the contest. And I would say that this is a good example of what happened to me for a number of years. This is, let's say, a disclaimer. I'm a rural boy, so I have a rural background. And for a long time, at least 12 years, more or less, I worked as a project manager with young people not in employment, nor in education or training in rural areas. So I was working mostly from a social intervention perspective. And it took me that time to understand that rural young people did deserve some other look, a more systematic look from science, and particularly from community psychology. You may say that it took some time. I would say that it took some wine, to be honest. And I'll go to the wine part. So I was working here at the Azores. These are some pictures from the region. And it really did, as I said, took some wine to understand that this was a research question. And why? Very simply because I got together with a colleague of mine, actually a sociologist. And this was about 5 years ago. I was not happy with what I was doing by that time in terms of research. I started to do research only in 2015. And for 2 years, I was involved in I would say, a very theoretical kind of research, which was not making me happy. So after a dinner in Galway, in Ireland, I kind of confessed to this colleague that I was not that happy, and he simply asked what I was doing before I was developing this theoretical research that I was doing at my research center. So I told him about the kind of programs that I was involved in, the kind of teams that I had worked in, and the people that my work covered, the people that my work tried to assist or support in any way. And he immediately said, so if you look at that work as a research question, for sure, that's something innovative. For sure, that's something that, at least from a sociological point of view, and I can imagine it from the community psychology, the social psychology, there isn't much out there about rural young people, not in employment or in education or training in rural areas, or actually about rural young people in general. And that was really, let's say, the starting point that brought me to some of the projects I'm also sharing with you today. And specifically to a conversation, a creative session held one and a half year ago in the 11th European Conference on Community Psychology, where me, Maria, Elena, Cinzia, and Nicholas got together and had this very nice discussion on how community psychology could contribute in a more decisive way for promoting the development and the future prospects of young people in rural areas. So this was, let's say, one intermediate point after some research that I was already developing up there. And from that conference resulted this paper, which was published this year, called Increasing Relevance of European Rural Young People in Policy Agendas, Contributions from the Community Psychology, which is available in the Journal of Community and Applied Social Psychology. So that's the paper that I'm going to present, and I will also add some more research initiatives that are going around in different research groups that I'm involved on the future of rural young people in Europe. And the outline will be, after this long introduction, the following. I will just offer a very short context on both the policy agendas and rural young people situation in Europe. I will talk about the challenges and also the opportunities that are available for rural young people. And then I'll go through, let's say, some guidelines, raw guidelines and roles that community psychologists can take to empower rural young people. And I will finalize with some ongoing initiatives, especially from the research side. So on the context, first of all, it is important to take into consideration that some major policy frameworks that the EU has been issuing for the past, I would say, 2 or 3 years, have more and more looked at the situation of rural communities, rural areas, and to this need to make these areas stronger, more connected, and more resilient. One good example of one of these frameworks is the European Green Deal, which has a major importance for rural young people and in general for rural communities. The new European agenda or EU youth strategy has also brought forward the importance to move rural young people forward as one of the 11 main priorities to be achieved until 2027. So from the youth policy side, rural young people are also becoming more and more relevant for the decision-making process. However, there is this huge gap between the proclamations of the policies and the decisions themselves. And I would say that a good example of this is the Next Generation EU framework, this resilience framework that you have been heard about, which collects a series of national plans based on a common framework, looking at reforms, major reforms and investments in the aftermath of the COVID-19 crisis. So very recently, I wrote down a report for the European Parliament on specifically on the school-to-work transition issues in the Resilience and Recovery Facility framework, on the Next Generation EU framework. And what I would like to share with you as an example that proclamations sometimes or many times do not match decisions is the fact that when you look at what we call the active labor market policies for youth, those that are promoting the transition, an easier transition from school to work for young people, what we see is that among 6 countries that I analyze in a more systematic way, all of them southern countries, Cyprus, Greece, Italy, Malta, Portugal, and Spain, in the total of 98 measures that focus on active labor market policies for young people, only 25 take into consideration that these policies have to be applied at a regional level, meaning that national governments are or should look at the differences between different parts of the country and different regions. So they should adapt to territorial differences. I think this is a good example showing that although there are some huge ambitions that have been brought forward by the European Commission and the European Union in general regarding how we should look in a more decisive way to rural areas, indeed, the case is that the major instruments out there are still limited in that matter. This also comes in a context where there are some, I would say, some misconceptions about how rural areas are evolving. And one very interesting trend that we should look at is the demographic trend. So in general, we think that rural young population is declining. And in general, if you go to the EU 27 main figures, you do see that there is this decline. But then you see that there is quite a difference between, let's say, the most developed economies within the EU and those located mostly in the South and Eastern countries. So this map shows that while some Eastern and Southern countries such as Poland, Estonia, Spain, Greece are losing a very big share of young people, or have lost a very big share of young people aged 15 to 24 for the past 10 years. The reverse is happening in countries such as France, Italy, Denmark, or Germany, where rural young population is actually fast growing. So this means that something is shifting in Europe. Young people may be looking more at or having a life and their own futures in rural areas. And this is why I say that some misconceptions must be corrected. But it is true that rural young people do struggle in rural communities. Two examples are in terms of employment and education. These are the rates for young people not in employment or not in education or training in rural areas, urban areas, towns and suburbs, and then EU 27 overall. And what we see is that for the past 12, 13 years in general, and most of the years, the rate of rural young people not in employment nor in education or training in rural areas is higher, although the gap has become smaller. But when you look at the national differences, the within countries differences, what you see is that especially in southern and eastern countries, such as Bulgaria, France, Greece, Italy, or Portugal, or even Spain, there is a huge gap in terms of the share of rural young people in this condition, not being employed or in education or training. And the differences between minimum and maximum show that maximum rates are always found for rural areas. For instance, for Italy, the highest rate is in Sicily. In Portugal is in the Azores Islands. In Greece, it's also located in one of the archipelagos. So if we go on, what we will see is that in general, at the subnational level, the employment rates are lower for rural areas in terms of young people. The same can be said about early school leaving from education and training. The gap between rural areas and cities and towns and suburbs has been limited also across these last few years. Actually, now the rate is higher for towns and suburban areas in terms of this indicator. But again, if I showed some of the figures for rural areas, what you would see is that in general, in southern and eastern countries, again, early school leaving from education and training is higher in rural areas. One good question in this context is, how is research trying to address this situation? This graph is part of a bibliometric review that I conducted with some colleagues this year. using only one major source, which is Web of Science. But in any case, what we see is that until 2021, the publications focusing on rural needs compared to needs overall is very low. So this was not still on the spotlight for researchers. And more importantly, what we see in terms of research regarding needs in general, and this is important for the psychology field in general and for community psychology in particular, is to see that really psychology hasn't been pretty much involved in understanding the issues that needs face. And this figure does show that. In blue, we have all the research that has been done in the social psychology field on needs, which is still representative, let's say. In yellow, we have a cluster of research on health and well-being, and then major clusters in red for sociology and in green for economics. But most importantly, and this is what I would like to address, is that the connections between clusters are very low. So for such a complex social issue, which is the situation of rural young people and rural needs in specific, we do not see many connections between disciplines, scientific disciplines. So in this context, what are the main challenges? And I will go very quickly on the main challenges that young people in rural areas face. First of all, of course, mobilities and out-migration. We do know that although in some countries, the number of young people in rural areas is increasing, we do see a strong out-migration flow from rural areas to cities and sometimes abroad. There is a huge gap between those that are leaving and those that are staying. The ones leaving are mostly those that are more academic-minded and that want to pursue professional plans, while those staying are mostly young people that have lower qualifications. And that, of course, exposes them to low-qualified jobs, precarious employment, and longer and more recurrent unemployment spells. Another challenge is the limited access to education locally in these areas. In a way, this is a problem because rural schools have a limited infrastructure. What we know is that both in terms of physical infrastructures, the school buildings, but also the social infrastructure, the number and the quality of teachers in these areas. In these two domains, infrastructure is more limited. We also know that there is a lower rates of teachers' retention in rural communities. And one important limitation for education in rural areas is that vocational and educational training curricula usually do not match local resources, meaning economic opportunities and young people needs. So there's a huge mismatch here in terms of what education can do to bring together local economy and young people's perspectives. And of course, this results in limited access to decent work, which is one of the SDGs goals. So we do know that there is a predominance of the agri-sector still in these areas, which usually passes on from generation to generation. So these are mostly family businesses. On the other side, we know that young people in rural areas have negative attitudes and representations about the sector, about the farming sector. And on the side, we know that these regions are struggling with industries being shut down and the lack of knowledge transmission, because if you don't have professionals, more experienced professionals locally, of course, knowledge about professions is not going to be passed on from generation to generation. And finally, of course, we are also facing gender gaps in rural areas. In some countries, Germany is a good example. The balance between young men and young women in rural areas is, well, there's no balance. It's quite unbalanced, this relation, with more and more men being part of the, let's say, the demographic landscape in these countries. The women staying, of course, are those that are often the less educated ones, and they have worse conditions to enter the labor market. Let's also look at young men, because in their case, although they are involved more often in the job market, they are low-skilled workers. They face precariousness, unemployment, and of course, illegal forms of work. This does not mean that there are no opportunities for young people in rural areas. Quite the opposite, and we have addressed that in this paper that we're presenting. Although there are lower digital skills registers for young people in rural areas, and there are barriers in accessing sometimes good quality Wi-Fi networks and equipment, the digital transition can represent an important opportunity for young people in rural areas. On one side, this can ensure greater coverage and efficiency from services. One good example can be public employment services in terms of reaching out to young people. And of course, this digital transition can also contribute to reduce out-migration fluxes, whether through services dematerialization and remote work, which can contribute then for younger generations to work from rural areas to anywhere in the country or in the world. On the other side, the green transition may bring more services to some rural areas. This transition can also contribute to upgrade digital tools and combine farming with services. A good example is ecotourism. And we do know, and we have seen with this inflation crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, that there is a greater and greater importance given to closer supply chains and local consumerism. So altogether, these lines of development may represent opportunities for all young people as well. And finally, rural youth participation. We do know from some studies in the area of community psychology that young people, especially rural young people, tend to have stronger emotional bonds towards their communities. They are also quite keen to be involved in local tradition, and specific causes for young people overall, but also for rural young people, do inspire young people's civic and political participation. So that's an asset, that's a resource that can be included in interventions. And that can also be streamed into opportunities for local decision-making, such as participatory budgets, but other forms of participation as well. So now comes the main question: how can community psychologists facing these challenges and these opportunities be relevant? So as a starting point, of course, we do know that community psychologists have this starting standpoint that they work with either whole or some sections of communities with a very, I would say, clear goal, which is to promote change and improvement for communities. And they do embrace complex approaches to social phenomena, but considering individuals in their specific context. So this means that we, as community psychologists, look at the processual perspective, and we also think that people are agents. They have the capacity and the resources to produce change in their own context. So this is, I wouldn't say a mantra, but this is our starting point as community psychologists. We do believe that communities should have the opportunity to change. Individuals should be part of that change. They have the resources, they have the capacities to be agents in that process. From our perspective, and we have followed this in different papers. One of the papers, another one that we have published. I will talk about that in a minute. But one of the approaches that we can follow to promote rural young people's perspectives and prospects in their communities is, first of all, to adopt an ecological systemic lens, meaning that if we want to address challenges and also to take the most that we can from opportunities for rural young people, we should consider the whole reality and the multiple levels, meaning that we should look at the interactions between individual factors with the micro level involving all that has to do with their relationships with parents, teachers, the most important relationships they have. Then working at the organizations, schools, public services, the community itself, the territory, and also the macro level involving not only the policies, but also values, media, etc. But we need a method. We need not only a theoretical standpoint, we also need a method. And we think that participatory approaches such as PAR can be an opportunity for that. And why? Because participation is a leeway to empower communities, first of all. Participatory approaches also promote collaborative and non-hierarchical approaches that can lead to long-lasting solutions in communities. And this is particularly important in rural areas where social relationships tend to be, especially intergenerational relationships, tend to be very hierarchical. And also participatory methods are key to address what we call complex or wicked social problems. Wicked problems are those that are so complex that they do not conform to linear solutions, to cause-effect thinking. So they really need negotiation and collaboration as tools for solutions. So PAR can provide, on one hand, a secure environment for discussion and negotiation between rural young people and other generations so that they can address their own local issues. PAR can also provide an opportunity to tackle rural youth's disengagement and distrust on institutions. And here I would like just to make a brief note. We do know from research that young people, especially in rural areas, have very low levels of trust on institutions. They do rely much more on informal networks for finding resources such as a job or even counseling for finding education. So institutions, not only because sometimes young people have unhappy track of a relationship with institutions, including schools, but also because the infrastructure out there is becoming more and more minimal. This level of distrust is increasing. So participatory approaches can be an opportunity to engage with young people and make sure that they are involved in changes within the institutions. And finally, as we know, local communities, rural communities are running low on rural resources. So PAR and other participatory approaches can be an opportunity also to promote rural youth knowledge and development, especially when only schools sometimes are the only available resource to promote that. In this context, and using an ecological lenses and also adopting this perspective of collaborative participatory approaches to solve local issues, we think that community psychologists can establish an intermediation between rural youth needs and service deliverers. This is one of the roles that community psychologists can have. They can also have a kind of higher order intermediation between, or establish this intermediation between several layers of reality from the micro to the macro. And this includes, of course, decision-making, which is something that is very relevant for changing the communities. And also make sure that youth initiatives, grassroots initiatives, can be streamed into decision-making itself. And we provide in our paper some examples, and afterwards we can discuss that in the Q&A, some examples of projects that did fulfill these different roles. And again, something else that we can do is to avoid what I call the moonwalking bear syndrome, which is to connect practice with research. I think we are more or less aware that there are many interventions out there, on-the-ground interventions, that do deserve to be not only understood and studied, but also disseminated. And that's a clear gap that we need to fill in, because some of these interventions can be really inspirational for other psychologists and not only psychologists, youth workers in general. So based on this, I would just like to very quickly share with you some initiatives that are trying to work out both the challenges and the opportunities out there for all young people. One good example is the Rural Youth Network, a cost action that is very well represented here in this session. So this action is funded by Cost Association within the Horizon Europe framework, and it's called a widening approach to research. And this is a network that gathers now about 120 participants from many different scientific areas, and not only researchers, also people working in NGOs, in public services, trying to address 4 key topics: social support, education, employment, and sustainability, so that we can bring together these 4 topics and reach out to a meta model of social inclusion for rural needs, which is represented by this working group 5 that is also available here. We have produced several documents, from policy briefs to manuals of best practices, whether they are methodological best practices in research or in intervention. And for psychologists specifically, we have also produced some papers, such as this example, which Maria Fernandes Duja and Helena Marta co-authored, on civic and political participation in outermost islands, so an example of a rural area. And we looked at the mediating roles of sense of community and agency in promoting higher rates of participation. So these are some examples, and I would like to share with you that this cost action, which is supposed to run until mid to 2024, is expected to evolve to a new research association, which we call the European Rural Youth Observatory, which will look at not only rural needs, but rural youth in general, bringing together again researchers, decision makers, and NGOs. And finally, some of us are also involved in the Tracking project. This project resulted from the cost action that I just presented. And this project, funded by the Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway grants, the EA Norway grants, is focusing on the analysis of public employment services effectiveness in supporting rural needs, and trying to see how digitalization is more or less effective in providing public services in this domain to young people. And we just very recently issued our first outcomes, which are some national reports of the 6 countries that are represented in this project, which also involves the International Labour Organization and the Heidelberg University in Germany. And we expect to be delivering a series of papers on, not only in a special issue that is now open, there's a call for a special issue open on active labor market policies for young people, and open to all scientific, social scientific domains, including psychology, but also some other manuals for public employment services that are involved with us in this project. So I hope that you are now more aware of the topic based on these lines of inquiry that we are trying to pursue in these projects, and also in this paper that I co-authored with Maria, Elena, Cynthia, and Nicholas. And of course, I'm open not only to questions, but also to comments, complaints. I'm okay with that. And thank you for having me for this webinar.
Thank you, Francisco. It was really, really interesting, and I think that well, you provided some, I don't know, ideas and points that, let's say, can, I don't know, be part of our research, but be part also of our maybe conversation right now. And I would maybe start asking you something about something that you mentioned, that is that rural young people, well, do not really, let's say, trust too much institution. And I think, of course, well, you were suggesting, and I cannot have any doubt about the relevance of adopting participatory action research approach to include young people. But I was wondering, what do you think about, I don't know, maybe practices of participation or deliberation that can be set up in order to involve young people in the rural areas? If you have specific, I don't know, idea or suggestion based on your experience.
Well, I'll probably just share a couple of comments on that. I don't have any, let's say, guideline on how that can be done, but I would certainly look at how local level decision makers can start to understand new process of decision making involving and sharing power with young people. I think that's the main issue. Most of the participatory, let's say, processes that I have been involved in do have a lack of power sharing with young people. So they tend to be processes where maybe the local decision makers will try to listen to young people. They want to know their opinions, but they're not so much interested in having young people as co-leaders of their own, of some important initiatives at the local level. So this is, I would say this is hard to change, and it would be interesting to see how at the local level, municipalities, regions, some deliberatory processes could be developed with this co-decision-making process being implemented. And that, from my perspective, I would start this at a very micro level, based on specific and very clinical, let's say, initiatives, to see if this can be disseminated just as a pilot, let's say. And maybe try to look at some initiatives out there which were transformative. If I can give you just a very small example, which I shared in the paper that we co-authored. I have been involved for quite a long time with a youth association in the Azores Islands. This is a youth association gathering students, university students that are not studying in the region, so they're studying abroad, outside the region, not abroad the country, but outside the region. And they started this grassroots movement in terms of improving the conditions of recently graduated students to come back to the region in terms of let's say, salaries, traineeships, opportunities for employment. They did collect they organized a series of events. They involved themselves, the decision makers. And at the one point, they managed to be negotiating with the decision makers. So they took the decision makers to a co-shared decision-making level. And the result of that was a series of legal changes on key employment policies in the region, which actually have been improved for the past 2 years, with the same, let's say, the same energy behind that. So this is an example. Sometimes probably young people will have to start the process, but I would like to see this process is being developed at a local level and then being disseminated, let's say.
Okay. Yeah, I was really wondering about the strategies that can be implemented from, let's say, the I don't know, the local level government. I mean, of course, if there is a movement that comes from young people, this is obviously something that, well, not obviously, but this is something that, I mean, may have the power to, yeah, let's say, at least be recognized as a stakeholder that wants to have a voice. And so, as you said, there should be some kind of negotiation. But well, probably what really is I'm struggling with at the moment is how the municipalities, the local government can support this kind of processes, given the reality that you were mentioning, that it's difficult from probably for different reasons that have to do with intergenerational relationship, with tradition and so on. It's difficult to open really a space for sharing authentically power with young people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was really thinking about how this could be supported, but of course it's a challenge and maybe there will be a lot to do on it.
Yes, and just one more comment is, of course, demographics here play, unfortunately, a role, because as populations become older in rural regions, you have less and less voters that are under 25. So let's be very practical. Decision makers will look less at that age range, in my opinion, and that will be a challenge to develop these processes, I would say.
But this is this is of course a real challenge also, because I mean, this is the situation that unfortunately, for example, does not concern only rural areas, but for example, it is something that relates to many countries. Italy is one of them. And so, I mean, I think that in a way, this requires more intentionality, more effort in order to keep a space for younger people to have not only a voice that can be heard or used to, I mean, show up when it's needed, but really to share power with them, because I mean, we are I mean, wasting, the risk is really to waste a lot of energy, of creativity, of opportunity, which is something that is relevant. And now I shut up because I see that there are other people that want to talk. Sorry for that.
No, thank you, Cynthia.
Nicholas, and then Alan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Francisco, for this presentation. It was wonderfully to see your striking visual figures, and everything was, and also the very broad, impressive broad scope of participation and research. Anyway, in Norway, it's I think the figures for your rural youth are decreasing. So we're not in your European Union statistics, so we're outside, as you know. So we don't figure in much of your research, but my impression is that we have a lot of distrust from in institutions from the young, and at the same time we have a lot of positive trends among young people, both in cities and in the districts. So Norway is famous for its what we call district policies, which means the Labour Party after the war, they built up a strong institutions in the rural areas. So to for instance, the school, as you mentioned, Francisco, several times, and also in my case for the article I wrote about a project as a school psychologist many years ago, and it's been interesting to see how you invited me to put it into a perspective or a larger context. But anyway, the schools in this particular district outside Bergen in the west coast, they had 14 schools, local small schools, where there was a high level of trust and confidence between people and the school, and just like we had the church in the old days. But now today there are only 50% of the schools left, so it's a centralization of the institutions, and the young people have to travel more distances to get to the schools, so they are disconnected, and the trust is going down. So they don't have these connections to emotional and connections through sport and activities as they used to do. This is in the rural areas, but in the cities it's similar, but it's a bit different. So I think to build trust, takes years, but there can be done some simple things also. If, at least in my project, I think it was the possibility for the institutions to see that the young people were actually resources and not problems. So how can we actually make use of young people as citizens and workers and so on? And I think we have a lot of symbolic participation. They put up young representatives in all kinds of committees, but they're not really having a voice. It's just symbolic. So what we need is a kind of two-way approach, from the top down, from the institutions and the policies, and also from young people showing engagement, and then try to connect. So at least for my project, I'm amazed to see that it's still alive after 25, 30 years. It's still growing, and it's happened to be a good timing when I was working in the beginning. But lots of people have contributed to this activity, of course, and it's I think we managed to connect the political level, the administration, the institution, and the young, and that was a success. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. Maria, may I just make a few comments, just very quickly? Nicholas, I think your comment also shows that we have to be careful in how we also define rural areas, because there are very different rural areas, from the mountain regions to the very peripheral regions, which is a bit the case in Norway, to outermost islands. So all of them have specific features and pose different challenges. So I think your comment also shows that we must be careful on how we frame the challenges and the opportunities across different rural areas. And thank you for that comment on that specific element. And secondly, I couldn't agree more. And even I think you can kind of summarize what I said in reply to Cynthia. You really need to connect top down and bottom up approaches, so that you can reach to models where participation is guaranteed. But in general, I do agree. In general, participation is mostly symbolic or institutional, once or twice in a year, based on a report, for instance. Not much conversation or negotiation. Sometimes some hearings, but that's it. So what we would need is to find some new models of cooperation between generations, definitely.
Alan, do you still have a question or comment?
Yeah, thank you, Maria. Thank you, Francisco, and other colleagues for your insights. I find them very useful for the work that I'm currently doing in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So right
Although
now
you're
we
not a
are,
psychologist, Alan, right?
yes,
That's
yes.
interesting.
So we are doing some project in Western Balkan region, trying to identify why the youth are migrating from rural to urban areas. What are the reasons behind it? So I have organized 4 focus groups among the female and male representatives, also aged from 15 to 24 and from 25 to 35 years old. And I have managed to identify some, let's say, very worrying results for the Bosnia and Herzegovina. Among them, I managed to realize that the youth in Bosnia and Herzegovina are not willing to engage in any kind of the activities, either political or the social. So the level of the distrust is, I don't know, it's extremely strong that they are not even willing to try anything in their lives. And somehow I realized that they are not willing to start moving away from their comfort zone. Even they said everything is bad. And then I asked them, like, what is bad? If the situation is like you are expressing, then you would move away, you would make a step forward. And they said, we don't trust. At the end, they said, we don't trust to anybody, which is very like scary situation.
Yeah.
And on for the younger group of representatives in focus groups, I received the feedback from them. They don't know what they want in their life. Like, I don't know, some of them are students, and when you ask them, I don't know, how do you see yourself in a few years? They don't have the expression. They just start to speak some elements that they heard from media, that we have a high level of corruption, that the government is not supporting youth and blah, blah. But when you ask them, did you try anything? Like, did you engage in some kind of youth association? Did you try to move anything forward? They are just replying with no. And then I'm just thinking, like, what kind of the proposal we should apply, like bottom-up approach of top-down or mixed approach. But it seems that the level of distrust from both parties are so strong that you don't know where to start.
Yeah, and sometimes thank you, Alan, for the comment, and for the record, Alan has a background in the economy, right? So it's
agricultural economics.
Yeah, so it's interesting how to see and to fulfill a part of our presentation, which is to communicate with other scientific areas and have this conversation around a common topic. And I know, Alan, that you're very much interested in the systemic lens and the systemic models. But regarding what you're mentioning, I think for the past 2 weeks, I have been thinking a lot on some of the issues you have mentioning. So I have more questions than answers, definitely. But it seems that we're reaching to a point that if you go to international reports, international research, national reports, there's this kind of generational buildup that, and I will use one of the words you use. It's a bit scary because what you see is a level of, you see extremes, you see groups of young people really committed with specific causes, more and more and more, I think. But on the other side, in general, you see a very high level of disengagement with institutions and disbelief in institutions. And sometimes resentment and even I would say more than that, even a denial situation in terms of refusing any kind of involvement. So I think that we were going back to Cynthia's main comment in the beginning. It's how we build up again bridges with these generations, and we make sure that they are involved. For instance, there's I wouldn't say this is the best example, but it's still a discussion. In Portugal, a couple of weeks ago, there was a discussion starting on the age to vote. surprisingly, a right-wing party was suggesting that young people from 16 should vote, while the left wings do not have an opinion or just say that's just rubbish, which is kind of surprising for me. But that discussion gained a bit of track. But actually, when you start discussing this, usually the position, irrespectively of the area where you're coming from, your ideology, is patronizing at people, saying, "Oh, what do they know about life?" And we're just talking about voting. Imagine real decision making and real involvement. But on the other hand, if you look at the parliament, and I have put this question forward to some people, how many people below 25 are in the parliament? So who is representing young people actually in the parliament? So we're talking only about representation. Imagine participation, effective participation. For sure, we have to map how other so I think these things are very random. And this is why I think not only community psychologists, but, well, social scientists in general working with rural people, young people, they should be aware of where the triggers are. The example I gave about this grassroots movement in the region I live, at one point, I think 6 months after they started these conferences and these meetings, and me and some other colleagues, we joined with them. So we did the process with them in terms of not only engaging them with some stakeholders, but also writing scientific reports. And that's something that I would like to stress also. When you assess and evaluate some of the topics they are interested in, and you show it to policymakers to kind of illustrate that what they are claiming for is right, and that you put that on media, on local media, so you're trying to connect all the dots, then they become a bit more not only aware but more receptive. So whether it's representation in terms of voting, whether it's participation in making us from the scientific level be more aware of these transformations and being part of the transformation, co-leading these movements, I think there's some room for improvement. But yes, it's a bit scary, the level of disengagement and distrust in institutions in general, I think.
Thank you.
I think we have Claudia, and also I want to say something after.
Yeah, of course.
Claudia.
I cannot lose the opportunity to say something, not a question, but something.
Yeah, Claudia is known for her questions, good questions always.
Yes, we have the same discussion in our parliament. We have a policy initiative for this vote at 16 years. Also, it's we expect what the decision will be in the near future. But if I look at this participation, because you discuss about participation, I don't know how it is in other countries, but I observed, at least in Romania, that mainly young people that are very well educated, with a good status, familiar status, and so on, are participating in the decision making.
Mm-hmm.
Not the others.
Yeah.
We had 2 months ago research in Romania, and we discussed with more than 120 young people, and we observed that many of them are not needs or people or young people with from vulnerable groups and so on. So mainly the young people that participate in decision-making process at local or central level, national level, are not needs and not from rural areas.
Mm-hmm.
They are, I don't know if it's discrimination or I think it's mainly a problem of opportunities for those from rural areas to participate in this type of decisions. Now we have in our national strategy for children's rights, we have a big component dedicated to participation of children, but mainly children after 14 years. So they are, let's say, young people, adolescents. We will see what will happen in the next future, because this problem of trust in institutions is really high in Romania. We have a problem with this trust, not only at young people, but also for the others.
The overall population.
Yes, the trust in institution is among in the overall population, it's around 30%. So it's very low. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Maria, if you want to, and then I'll make a comment.
Yeah, just we also have Vladislav and Elin. Also, my comments. But I want to just say that this is I think that the youth issue of youth participation issue is not new, and I think that we keep having the same conversations over and over, and with the same, sometimes with the same suggestions and comments on how to improve it. But one thing that I find that maybe we should move from is this idea that we need to create more. No, it's not. Okay, how to explain this? Young people are actually participating, and actually they struggle to get their voices heard. So like they try, for example, in climate change and environmental issues is one example that young people, they try to have a say, they try to participate. And when they try, institutions, the public, don't accept their participation. So my question or comment is in this direction. Shouldn't we be more attentive to the forms that young people are actually engaging in social and political and environmental issues, instead of creating more top-down processes that they don't trust? Shouldn't we be creating more spaces for giving their voices a space and respecting their forms of participation as well? I don't know.
Yeah. I'll comment now. And
then
I'll start with your comment. Well, definitely. My only concern is if, I don't know. I really don't have a clear answer for this, but yes, definitely. And the example I gave, I think it's an example. So it's a group of young people. They have a common interest. They have similar concerns. They start a process. They start to engage with each other. Then they engage with academia, other associations, and then they finally are in a position to discuss and negotiate with decision makers at the regional level, which is good. It was an interesting process from top down, from bottom up, on a bottom up approach. My only concern is I think we should have both approaches. Otherwise, we will be. I'm not saying that decision-making processes should not change, that they are monolithical, they do not evolve, they must evolve. But I do believe that our democracies are based in institutions. So if we do not find some way to balance their participation processes with the institutional approach, my concern is that it will always be in parallel, or we will only be kind of approaching specific, very limited, I wouldn't say causes, but topics or initiatives. So the thing is how you balance both things. I do agree with you. We cannot say that they do not participate at all. They of course they have their own ways of participating, but how can we kind of balance that then with an approach to institutions? And I think that's in part also answers to Claudia's remarks, which are common also to Portugal or to other countries.
Thank you. Vladislava?
Thank you. Thank you, Francisco, from the interesting presentation. And listening to all of you, I was thinking how we can find the steps to involve or engage the youth in this process of participation. First, I think that we should find these young people, because this group is very difficult to be found in Bulgaria, for instance. When we want to make research events with young people, especially needs in rural areas, it is very difficult to find these people. We can find them in the registered in the public employment services. They're in the statistics, but really we can't find them. The second thing is to develop a new models of communication. Somebody spoke about this, mentioned it, between these young people and between the institution. And the third thing is to find a place where both groups, the institution and the young people can meet. And this could be, for me, my opinion is that this could be a digital space, because young people like to visit the social media, the social networks. They are more active there in the digital spaces. And I think that if we have more events, if researchers, if policymakers, stakeholders meet digitally, because I think the future is a digital world, not this is my opinion, of course. And when we find this place, probably this will motivate young people for more participation. So this is how I imagine the work with the process with participation. How can we motivate young people to participate in the process, in the communication between institutions and youth organizations? Yeah. This is just a comment and
thank you,
thoughts about.
No, thank you. Yeah, we definitely have to understand what is the role of digitalization. Probably we're looking at this from, I don't know, our own generation perspective. But I would say that, again, just as we need top-down approaches together with bottom-up approaches, I think the digital space must be combined with real spaces. One of the concerns, one of the reports that made me think a lot for the past 2 weeks is the latest report on well-being from the World Health Organization, where you see that the connections between this digital life and the levels of well-being or low levels of well-being are more or less established. So that's something that should question us. On the other hand, I think that there are a couple of good practices coming out, from instance, from Ireland, from Sweden, some in rural areas, not as many as in cities or suburban areas. But one of the approaches that some governments are trying to find to at least start to engage with young people is to create what they call the one-stop shops. So places in the community where all range of services are available, and including spaces for youth associations, so where they can meet, they can engage with the other young people, but also where they can address public employment services, educational services, welfare, etc. That's something probably that we should start looking at, and how the state can provide some resources, even if in a very concentrated way. But it's the door for everything, the door for participation, the door for employment, the door for education. And young people do identify that space in the community. And I've read a bit about that, and I think it's an interesting approach to youth engagement with institutions and higher levels of involvement. Sorry for the long reply.
I'm not sure if Elena, do you want to comment something?
Yes, but perhaps Helen have.
Alan, do you want to say something else, or?
No, I believe Nicolas.
Okay. Nicholas, okay.
Can I speak? Yeah, okay. I was happy to hear your last comment, Francisco, because I was recalling a new, I mean, the oldest space to meet, at least in Norway, is the natural environment. And one of my, and this is very established connection to well-being, is that the young people in Scandinavia are using the natural environment less than before. Before we used to go in the woods and skiing and running and bicycling, but now it's decreasing among the young, and this is really a concern of mine. But at the same time, we have this contrasting, like was mentioned just now, about the activism for the climate. So we have two different reactions here, and how could we try to address this? I mean, recalling today there was the Canada agreement, as you all know, about protecting the natural environment. We have now not only a Paris agreement, we have I think was Montreal maybe in Canada, where they met all the nations. So 190 countries, I think, have agreed to protect the natural environment, and the most engagement, the highest engagement levels are among the young people. So you have these associations you mentioned, Francisco, how to, I think if we want to engage the young, we have to meet them on their own premises, on their own spaces, in where they usually meet, and go from there. This is a bottom-up approach, of course, and what is their agenda? What do they really want to change in society, and how to meet them in a dialogue around their own issues. When I was a student, we had hundreds of youth or adolescent clubs. You know, you could be member of a club, a social club. Now they are all vanished. There's not one left. So this was kind of a youth institution where they actually, it was their own club. They owned it, you know. So they maybe had one or two grown-ups just checking in and locking the doors. Otherwise, they run it themselves. But today they are lost. They're gone. So it was a threat, I think, to the adult society that they had some power over their own activities, and there was all these rumors about drug misuse and alcohol and so on. But this was not really the problem. It was more how the money to run them. You know, it was you need someone to pay for the premises. But I think we need to go and find, just like in the clinical psychology, when we do motivating interviewing, we have to start where is the shoe hurting? What is the problem for the young, and not just bring our own agenda along and start looking for. Problem with research is that we have 90% of the Norwegian research on any health topic is based on students as participation. And this is not reflecting society. It's only a small age group.
Yeah.
So we need to include the young in all kinds of research. And community psychology, I believe strongly that we have a unique position with the research methods to do this.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You. Elena, yes, please.
Yeah. No, I only would like to say that I think that in order to promote the young people participation, if I see the Italian situation, I think that we need to offer to them some opportunities to participate, but opportunities in which they can experience a real participation. Because if I think the situation in the high school, I mean, from the theoretical point of view, we promote the participation of students. But I don't know if Cinzia agree, but in reality, students don't really experience a good participation because their voice is not heard by the teachers or the rest of the school. They cannot change anything. So they, I think, often, not always, but often, a bad experience of participation. And I think that this discourages these people. It's the opposite of motivation to participate. So I think that we need to offer some basic experience. I was thinking about civil service, because I think that in civil service, they can try to have a good experience of participation in an organization. Sometimes these organizations has strong ideals, strong values. They are organizations that are involved in social problems. And through the participation in this organization, that also can see the institution with different eyes. Because I think about experiences that a colleague did in one region in Italy, working with young people in order to promote participation. And he proposed to young people to interview some institutional people, figures, and then try to put themselves in their place and try to understand what it's possible to do with the laws we have, with the resources in that local situation. And it was amazing how these young people understood something about the politics, but also they developed some ideals, some project that before weren't in their mind. So I think that in this moment they need tools, instruments, experiences in order to try to participate in a strong way. And I was thinking also about some young volunteers that during the pandemic did their contribution, and then they disappear. And I don't know why, but I think there is a problem about the organization that was not able to maintain these young people in their organization. And it's not, it's not fault of young people, it's not fault of organizations. I don't know what happened, but I think that it's important to understand what happened, because we can perhaps find some ideas about why young people were motivated to participate and then decided not to participate, from the individual, the organizational and community levels. I don't know if I was clear.
You were, and I think that this is probably a great way of finishing the webinar. I don't know. I don't know if you want to say something else, Francisco, Cynthia,
No,
Nicola.
just to acknowledge again the opportunity for having us here. And I think we gave a good example of participation today, volunteer participation. And thank you for the comments and questions and challenges that you're raising. And who knows, in the future, we can contribute to a position note of the ECPA on participation of young people. Who knows?
ECPA and cost action as well.
And cost
because
action, yeah.
should be a group,
A joint effort.
Yeah, a collaborative
Yes,
task.
yes, please include also sociologists and economists with you.
Yeah, definitely.
Everyone should be included. So, but so thank you, Elena, also for the final comment. I think it brings some hopes of how to actually help to promote youth participation and maybe we should think more often on not only how to engage young people, but how to engage them in a sustained way over time. This is probably one of the other challenge, I would say. So thank you, Francisco. Thank you, everyone. From my side, I think it was really interesting. So I will stop.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.